Welcome to the Dr. Dad's podcast, where a naturopath and chiropractor come together each week to share lifestyle medicine, health advice, and inspiring interviews with some of the top experts in health and wellness, bringing you the latest in nutrition, exercise, ancient healing, toxins and detox, your microbiome, mindset, hormones, brain, and much more. Stay tuned. We're going to teach you how to experience growth daily.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Dr. Dads, and I'm here with my co-host, my good friend down in El Paso, who just told me it's 108 degrees down there.
It's hot. It's hot. I know last week I was bragging about cool rain, but it's hot right now.
Wow. So both Dr. Paul and I live in the Pacific Northwest, and so we don't know what those temperatures feel like. Except for he just told us he came back from down there. So
Yes.
we feel for you.
I'll take the rain and the overcast weather, please.
So I'm gonna read the intro or bio for our amazing guest that I'm touched as a naturopathic doctor and proud to call him a colleague, and I'm gonna dive into his bio here. So Dr. Paul Anderson, naturopathic medical doctor, is the director of Advanced Medical Therapies in Seattle, Washington, a clinic focusing on the care of patients with cancer and chronic diseases. Former positions include professor of pharmacology and clinical medicine at Bastyr University, which is also in Seattle, and chief of IV services for Bastyr Oncology Research Center. He's a graduate of NUNM, formerly known as National College of Naturopathic Medicine, and began instructing classes at naturopathic medical schools in the early 1990s. He's a co-author of the Hay House book, which we think everybody needs to get, Outside the Box Cancer Therapies, with Dr. Mark Stengler, as well as a co-author with Jack Canfield, the success guru, called Success Breakthroughs. He's a frequent CME speaker and writer and has extended his educational outreach through his CE website, www.consultdranderson.com. So I had the amazing pleasure of having Dr. Anderson teach me at one of my chelation courses over a year ago, and I was blown away by this guy. He's full of compassion. He's like a big teddy bear, full of love, and so intelligent. And you never feel that sense of I know more than you, and you're a younger doctor, and therefore you don't know anything. This brings about him this energy of inclusiveness, and no doubt he's taking on a huge role just with advancing naturopathic medicine, advancing alternative medicine, and really speaking to everything that all of us need to know with regards to prevention and beyond. So we're super excited to have you here, Dr. Paul. Please say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. That's an awesome intro. So my name is Paul Anderson. I do live in Seattle. I travel quite a bit. I just got back from Texas, where it is very hot, and but I'm coming to you from my little studio I have here. So I'm a naturopathic doctor, as was mentioned, and actually I started in medicine on the allopathic side of medicine in 1976, so that's a long time ago, and I did that mostly in laboratory medicine, and then in I don't remember exactly when now, but I have adult children, so the older ones were babies. I thought it would be a great idea. I own my own lab. To sell my lab and go to finish medical school as a naturopathic doctor, and told my wife, and she's still married to me, which is pretty cool. We had 5 little kids.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't recommend that, by the way.
Plan your life. And I can't imagine having more than 2. So good for you.
Plan your life better. But anyway, we lived through it. And so practiced in the state of Oregon, just south of where I am right now, for quite a while, and had, in those days, everyone pretty much had general type practices. There was a couple people that specialized in stuff, but really we were more generalists, as people do now. But the way that the practice evolved rather quickly is once people find out that you do integrative or naturopathic therapies, you get different types of patients. And so we start to get a lot of cancer patients and a lot of people with very bad chronic illness both things I knew next to nothing about, really. I mean, I knew how not to harm somebody, but really, if you go back, say, 25 years, what we knew wasn't very much. But the patients kept coming, so that's what really drives your educational endeavors. Really, once you're out on your own, so that's the direction that my practice went, was cancer and bad chronic illness, and it's been that way ever since. I have always, like, even back to, I think I started teaching professionals in the like 79 or something. So I've been teaching professionals for a long time. And my non-clinical kind of educational mission is just, really, it's largely based on the idea that there's no reason someone should go through learning as many things the hard way as I did and not like share it. Like that just makes no sense to me at all. And partly because I like teaching. If I didn't like teaching, I might not do that. But that's really where that came from. And then when we did the book that you mentioned, and I'll hold it up so that my publisher gets to see I did this. They love it. There you go. Square orange, can't miss it outside the box. Mark and I, Mark Stengler, Dr. Stengler, he's in California. We were in school together. I think we were separated by a year. But as happens in many professional schools, he married someone in my class, so I know the whole family. He came to a training I was doing about, 5 years ago now, 4 years ago, and it was oncology, integrative oncology training. And we got together after, and he said, he says, because I was finishing up the research in integrative oncology at Bastyr. We can talk about that later. And was presenting all this new stuff we'd learned, et cetera. And we were having dinner, and he says, you should write a book, because people only so many people go to conferences, and this is really exciting what you do. And they followed it right away with the statement, but you'll never get a publishing deal, which is awesome. Thanks, Mark. And so he says, but he says, because you only do things for professionals and you're not a known quantity. But he says, I've written a bunch of books for the public, and so I can get a publishing deal. And what was interesting, when we were, it was like 20 years since we'd seen each other. Both of our practices evolved in the same time period, in the same way, just based on, hey, cancer patients are going to come, whether you want them to or not. You learn about it. Because he was in California and was a bit more restricted scope of practice-wise, he developed some extreme expertise in the area of botanicals and cancer and some other stuff. And I had developed expertise in different areas. And so we sat down and outlined the book. 5 chapters were kind of my wheelhouse and 5 were Mark's. And then we traded chapters. But it was an awesome book to write, because for the same reason that I teach doctors, we felt like there's not a great resource for patients, families, loved ones of people with cancer to go to sort through all the alternative information. The book's really well referenced, so that also if you go to your doctor, they can see there's references, etc. And so the book was really a labor of love. It was very easy to write because it was our life, So that's kind of, the big, 10,000 foot version of the career. But I have a clinic in Seattle called Advanced Medical Therapies, and it's operated day to day by my associates, because I'm gone doing other things too much. And so we have case conferences, and I still keep my hands in with these patients. But I always tell the patients it's not safe for me to manage you, because I might be in Austin tomorrow or something. So yeah,
or eating somewhere.
Yeah. I was.
Well, the name of the book really says so much. And like you said, the square orange on the front versus a round one. I mean, what is it like for you with some of those initial conversations with patients? Because I imagine that the patients you see sometimes either come as a last resort, or B, they come to you because they only want alternative therapies. But how do you start to sort of bridge that? And that's what this book does very well. Bridge the gap between the East and West, philosophies or what have you, or prevention versus the standard of care, which would probably be chemotherapy for most cancers. How do you bridge that conversation? And maybe the book is part of that tool.
Well, the book has helped a lot because there's a lot of, as you know, conversations we have every day repeatedly with people. So that was part of it too. It's been interesting to live through the last 25 years in doing this, in that, up to about 15 years ago, it was most patients were told if they worked with anyone else like me, that the oncologist would probably fire them. It wouldn't treat them, which was awesome, to deal with. So we did a lot of clandestine integrative oncology in the old days. And there were, slowly, it was usually guys about to retire in the oncology world. They would send me their elderly patients who they knew. They would say, look, I'll kill you if I give you chemotherapy, so go see this Anderson guy. I don't know what he does, but go see him. Those are the referrals that you would get.
Right.
Which is actually good, because if an elderly person doesn't get chemo, you actually have a pretty good canvas to work with. But in the last 10 years, it's sort of the specialty of naturopathic oncology, all that is kind of out there, and we don't get as many people being told not to see us. So the conversation, though, and this is we're going to have a integrative oncology conference that I'm helping to run in the fall, and I kind of built it around something I realized after looking backwards at cancer patients, and it's, aside from prevention of cancer, which is the best conversation to have, right? Most people don't come for prevention, although some do now, especially if they have a family member pass away. That usually gets their attention. But once you're in cancer care, you have to look at it that there's the initial diagnosis and treatment. And sometimes that's super heavy treatment. Sometimes it's very little, like with the elderly folks, et cetera. But that's one period. Then there's recovery from treatment, which now we get people coming in for because they've got neuropathy from chemo, or they just have no energy or something. And then there's actually a third phase, which is if they get stable, either stable disease or no evidence of disease remission, then there's secondary prevention. And we used to get none of those people. And now we get people who come in and they say, I survived breast cancer. They say they can't find it. And they also said, well, come back if you have symptoms or you get cancer. Is there anything else I can do? There's a ton you can do. So in the book, we kind of go through that and looking at it through the lens of what are the big triggers for cancer, what's appropriate in period A here, where they may be getting radiation and all this other stuff, versus recovery versus prevention. So nowadays, it's like we have a little bit more finessed way of dealing with that. So if someone comes in and they say, well, I don't want to do any chemo or radiation or whatever, or surgery, we can kind of back up and say, well, sometimes that's appropriate idea. Sometimes, like, you got a 90% cure rate with a standard therapy, it would be, in most cases, not too smart to not take that bet. What we try and tell them, though, is that doesn't exclude all this other stuff that we do. And we can do a lot of things that make standard therapies work. Now, we also have patients where the oncologist literally says, if I had your cancer, I would not do standard therapy because it's got like a 4% success rate and 100%, adverse event rate. And that's really common now too, where they'll say, I'll give you the treatment if you want, but I wouldn't take it myself. So in those cases, again, we're starting with a blank slate. So a lot of it is just reframing the conversation to what's, logical, and letting people know it's pretty much not either or. And that was one of the reasons Mark and I decided to do the book too, is we both kind of evolved in that idea of it's not that we're bad or they're bad, or we're good and they're bad, or whatever. It's that there's so much we can do that no one knows about if we work together. And sometimes that's a little bit of standard stuff, sometimes it's a lot. But if you look at the trail from diagnosis through secondary prevention, integrative and naturopathic oncology covers about 80% of it, and 20% is standard care. So that's the thing people don't realize. So that's that's the way we lay it out for them. And if they're really invested in doing something that we think is not the safest thing or not good, we usually will refer them and try and get someone else to talk to them. But most people get it.
Go ahead, David.
That's really cool. I mean, it's interesting, the timetable there, like you're saying, in the last 15 years, how so much has changed, because you're right. I mean, there were children being taken away from parents just 10 years ago if they didn't do the standard of care for cancer or things like that, right? Or and people were having to leave the country, I know, in the US and go to Mexico, or they were going to other countries to get these types of treatments and these therapies that just aren't available, and we're just misunderstood, like you're saying. And now it's nice to see this integration of both. And like you're saying, it's not that one's better than the other. It's just they both need to be used, in unison depending on the case.
Yeah, it's a different landscape. I will say there's still, depending on the city you're in, there's still children being taken away from parents and things of that nature, which we treat pediatric oncology patients, and it's always a really fine line, with kids, and there's legitimate concern, but there's some, it's very state by state. So for example, in Seattle here, it's pretty restrictive, but we can still do a lot depending on how we navigate the line. In Chicago, I had the privilege of being involved with a colleague, had a child going through bone marrow transplant because of a blood cancer. And the Children's Hospital in Chicago actually allowed me to conference with them on how to use some natural therapies during bone marrow transplant, which is, we do that out here. And it was totally like they were not trying to take the child away. They were really trying to integrate and help. So and that would have never happened, all those years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing hearing stories like that, because it just shows that it's not just us that think outside the box. It's other doctors that are also wanting to think outside the box, because at the end of the day, if you're listening to this and you maybe don't trust your medical doctor, or you don't trust alternative therapies, there's definitely a movement that there's a change that is happening, that has happened, where doctors, at the end of the day, no matter what your title is, you've got the patient's best care in mind. And that's important. And you said something earlier, which as all of us as alternative practitioners, or alternative to standard of care, we all harp on prevention, and really that's your best therapy against any chronic illness, but definitely when it comes to cancer. So I want to hear on, because I know you're also a root cause focused doctor. You want to uncover some of the reasons for why people have got to the place that they have. I want to hear just some of your routine investigations for things that you look at that have allowed these epigenetic factors to turn on mechanisms for tumor growth or what have you. What do you usually look for with patients?
Yeah, it's that part has really evolved to just our understanding, of tumor biology in the last 10 years is huge. So it was one of the reasons we put a whole chapter in the book about, basically what causes cancer, right? Which is not one answer, or it'd be a short chapter. And there's, but the reason I think that's so important, and I was really excited I got to write that, Mark just told me I had to anyway, so was there's three sort of converging ideas around cause of cancer. And if you know where the causes might be coming from, then you can kind of turn rocks over to look for that. One of the things I think that just goes to human nature is people get invested in one cause or the other, and they'll think, there is one cause, and they're all about that, and their treatment's all about it, or whatever, which is fine. But the problem occurs that if you see enough people with cancer, you realize that there's a lot of other, side doors into triggering it. Especially you think about children, who haven't been here that long and they have cancer. obviously there's, other factors at play there. So kind of like, the idea of having the phases of, this is active treatment time and we got different, fish to fry here versus recovery versus prevention. The same with cause. And so the big three areas, just to keep it super simple, one is genomic. And so, and what you're really saying there is there's some cancers that have super hardcore genetics that turn on easily. So the epigenetic triggers just spring them. Not a lot, some of the childhood cancers are that way, where they're just born with this weird bad collage of genes and it gets turned on from a trigger, and it's really tough. Most adult cancers that are related to genetics, even like BRCA genes that are related to breast and ovarian cancer, they still only express in, say, 60% of people that have the gene. So that means 40% have some epigenetic trigger that's actually shutting it off or shutting it down. So genetics have kind of, and it's our human way of trying to, we want it one way or the other, right? It can't ever be more than one. So genetics now are getting this backlash against them because all of the treatments for 50 years and research went into genetic causes. And we thought, well, if we can just shut off these switches, we'll have no cancer. If that was going to work, we'd have been further ahead. And many of the genomically targeted therapies don't really work very well. And that's because you can target the genomics, and that's great, but it's this whole microcosm of what turned the genes on really that we would look at. So genomics still are a big factor, but really it's epigenetics that feed in. Mm-hmm. Then there's an old idea of cancer theory, if you will, that actually up through like the writing and publication of our book was being reframed in tumor biology, which I hadn't known that till I started digging into modern tumor biology research about cause. And that was that there was this old idea that cancer looked a lot like gametes, like the cells that come together to make embryo and stuff like that. And so that theory was, so that it must be that kind of mechanism that creates cancer then. And this is like 100-year-old theory. Well, that theory got morphed over time, and in the 1990s, 2000s, and up until today, what the tumor biologists are writing about is they were onto something, but their technology was very simple. So they were describing what they saw, and it looked like trophoblasts, so they call it the trophoblastic theory. And so what they're really writing about nowadays is they weren't totally wrong there. We thought it was this crazy idea from the olden days, but what they're saying now is what they were seeing is cancer stem cells. And now that we have better tumor biology that we can do, of course, 100 years later, cancer stem cells, they call it stem cell theory. It's really not a theory. We know it occurs. And the thing that happens again is if they get turned the wrong way, if they're turned the right way, they will stay very quiet and maybe never do anything. If you get turned the wrong way, they will express. And so it's not a genomic expression, it's actually a stem cell expression. And that's, and if they get really turned on, they can recruit your normal cells to be cancer cells. So there's that one and the genomic one, a lot of the same triggers. And then the third real big idea, and I avoid calling them theories because that implies that, they're probably not right. No, they all have a say. The third one is metabolic idea. And so Dr. Seyfried has written a lot of books about metabolic theory. And again, it's not all one or the other, but if you look at it, metabolism can be a big epigenetic stressor on both the stem cell and the the genomics. Toxicity can, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to consider the metabolism one way or the other. And the way I look at that then is if you come in and you're in active treatment, my goals during active treatment are to keep your healthy cells as healthy as possible because it's pretty hard active treatment on your body. I'm not as much worried about these other areas beyond working on your diet, metabolic stuff, and all of that, because I need to get you to live through standard treatment. But the benefit of that is if you do integrative care during standard of care treatment, you come out the other side healthier, and it's harder then actually to turn on either a stem cell driven problem or a genomic driven problem after chemo and radiation. Because another thing that we put in the book, and to my knowledge, we're the first book to take this out of the scientific realm and put it in, is it's very well accepted and known in papers being written today, and as of like the day before we had to quit writing, that chemotherapy and radiation make you have more propensity for more cancer, either your primary or metastases later on. And so, and this is hardcore tumor biologists writing. This is not a disputed fact.
Mm-hmm.
The only way, and they don't, they end all their papers with, well, hopefully we'll develop a drug that'll stop that, right? And another drug to just shut off this tumor drive. But if you look at it, the reason that chemo or radiation does it is they're an epigenetic stressor. And so our goal during active treatment is, we don't need to get in the way of your active treatment. We want to keep your healthy cells from getting any of this collateral damage.
Mm-hmm.
And in recovery, you really focus on that because we don't want them to turn on, bad cancer. So it's, knowing the underpinnings, then that gives you things to focus on. But then if you also have like a rational, approach that if I'm in the middle of radiation or chemo or both, or I'm going to get surgery tomorrow, I don't need a bunch of other stuff. I need to stay healthy and recover from that, and we can kick up the intensity on the healing and protection, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm done with that therapy and I need to recover, and that's the first time I see any of us, you got to work really hard on the recovery part. So I think knowing that there's these three big areas that all can turn on a cancer, and if you can have all three, it gives you places to focus.
Mm-hmm. That's such an amazing breakdown, and what people need to understand is that the third one that you're referring to, the metabolic approach to this whole philosophy, is your tool for prevention. And I'd love for you to sort of dive into, it could be Otto Warburg or just, the anaerobic reality of cancer cells and why this emergence of fasting and detox and ketogenic diets, why it plays such an important role in that third process.
Yeah. Well, you're probably fortunate. I've ordered a new tripod. I have this wonderful glass whiteboard that I could draw on, but you're gonna miss out on that. The other way I do it is on little cards I hold up, and those are
right.
So we won't do any of that. That's why I'm doing all my hand motions.
Right.
But yeah, it's sorry. The last time I did it, it was a big hit. So the metabolic part is at least as far as things you can do today to help across the whole spectrum of cancer therapy, you can start to interact with that. And there's another thing I try and get across to patients and also doctors is if I look backwards just at all the patients I've seen over time, and I look at, they all big groups may have done similar integrative therapies through their cancer or similar cancers, et cetera, but yet some people do really well and some people it's better, but not as well. Because we're always trying to think, well, why did one group, they all did kind of the same thing. Why did one group not do as well as the other? In most cases, it comes down to three things that are mostly in the patient's control, which is really important to know. And I think from the patient point of view or family, this is supposed to be empowering because you don't have to go elsewhere to do most of this basic stuff. And what we saw was if these foundational things were not addressed, all the other cool therapies, whether they were, botanical or IVs or whatever, would help, but this, like the foundation, they would just fall through.
Mm-hmm.
And what it turns out is, for the most part, these three pillars work on the metabolic side of the patient to keep them strong. healthy and less likely to either genetically or stem cell wise turn to cancer on. So it's sort of like the metabolism part is one of the big effectors. So the three things I usually break down for people. The first one is food, and this is not just what you eat, which is important, but also how clean you're eating. And we don't live in a toxin-free world, so we can never totally get away from toxins. But what I tell people is we don't have to try and add it either. So, and we eat every day, so we don't need to just get the most toxic food, which we're really good at producing here in North America. Least toxic, but also then it goes to what is it you're eating, and then we add on nowadays the timing of eating, right? So food's a big driver, obviously, and tends to be, and you can, like, we use keto or modified keto as an actual therapeutic tool with patients in many cases. It's really hard to do that on your own unless you're super well educated about it, because we actually have people track their ketones and their glucose and put it into an online program that shows that they're in ketones. Because most people think they're doing keto, they're not. So if you're going to go to the trouble of doing a dietary change, you should actually be doing what you say you're doing. So we track it that way if we're going to use it as a therapeutic input, and it's a big hammer. But we've also had people where we have to adjust things either because of keto can be tough on some people or whatever. And then you have to look at, well, diet is a foundational thing too. So the first thing is really timing of eating, which we'll get to in a second. And then there's the toxicity stuff, trying to remove as much of that. And then there's just junk, like processed food and stuff like that, trying to get that out of there. Then you can get up to the therapeutic things, and they usually tend to be either like a high fiber vegetable intake with a lot of flavonoids, clean fats and proteins, kind of low carb approach, or maybe a full-on keto approach, still using clean foods. You have a lot of people that argue about keto or low carb or whole raw foods or whatever. And I've seen all of them work. I think the other problem is if people are not doing them in a clean way and they're not doing them, with some thought around what they're doing to their metabolism, that's when you can get into trouble with, different ideas around diets. And we see a lot of people, who are trying to kind of freestyle on keto, for example, and they're like nowhere near in keto, and so they're obviously not going to get the outcome. But the diet part is important in that respect. But the other thing that I've seen, and I've seen more evidence of it, not because it wasn't ever a thing, it's just like this is one of those everything old is new again. And 25 years ago, if we had a cancer patient, we would try and get them to fast, and then we would do other stuff with them. Intermittent fasting wasn't so much of a thing, but we would do fast with them. Well, now that's like all the rage, because fasting in one way or the other actually shifts your metabolome in a direction that's anti-cancer. And they even have, I was always so happy when I would come across like human studies that got published before we wrote the book. So I was able to put some of this stuff in, because a lot of the slam on the fasting study, well, they're mice or they're worms or whatever, which, all right. But they did one that was really impressive to me, and it was with breast cancer survivors, which is a huge area of survivors. And they didn't change what they ate at all, that was for a study, that's good. Now, for clinical use, you want to change what you eat too. But by simply leaving their diet the same, but putting one group on ad lib, eat when you want, the other group did a 13-hour daily fast. So not too hard, really, to not eat for stop eating at dinner, drink a lot of water, you're sleeping the rest of the time. That's all they did. And they had a third higher survival rate over I forget, it's 3 or 5 years that they followed these people in the people that just did the 13-hour fast. So one of the things I'll tell people is, like, you have control over when you eat, unless someone's feeding you, right? And then hopefully you can tell them. We start with that, like baby steps. So cleaning their diet up, cleaning the food they eat up, and then starting with, say, a 13-hour fast. Because you can, I for my own health maintenance, do mostly daily intermittent fasting. And I started, at 12 or 13 hours, and then you sort of walked it forward, and I do more than that. But with the worst, oh, I can't go without eating person, you can start with 10, 11, 12 hours and walk up to 13. And it was just really nice to know 13 hours would turn, essentially it turns on a process called autophagy and mitophagy, and it's a cell repair process. If you're constantly feeding yourself, your body is in this, we must need to be metabolizing and growing, and the repair part doesn't turn on. So that's a huge part of it. And what we see with that actually makes as much impact as the kind of diet the person eats, I mean, this is excluding junk diets, is just by doing intermittent fasting, we've seen people's average blood sugars drop a lot. Like, we have people who do that, clean their diet up just in the mildest amount, and do a little bit of exercise, and they'll go from being diabetic to non-diabetic in the type 2 diabetes patient, which is a huge driver of metabolism. So, what you eat, the food part, how clean it is, and the timing of eating. Now, some people will also, they'll do a 13-hour fast every day, and if they really want to be more aggressive, they may do a one-day fast per week, or a 2-day fast. Because thankfully I don't have cancer to deal with, I just have my health to deal with. I try and do that like once a month. It's better than nothing, but that also will do it for you. And if people really have to, like, there's some criticality to when they eat and they can't hit 13 or 14 hours, we'll try and work them up to a weekly fast, which can also do that. So food is one big pillar, and you can see like that, like, you can take all the pills you want, and if the fuel you're putting in and the timing the fuel goes in isn't appropriate, the metabolism, your body's metabolism, will not play ball. The middle one, which is hugely important, and all of the research of the last 10 years shows this, but the oncology world is really slow to acquire this one, is muscle. And so the bottom line is, you look at survival over time, more muscle mass, less fat mass equals longer survival of every disease, but especially in cancer. And this goes back to metabolism. It's like your whole body, is moved by muscle, and muscle is one of the biggest metabolic organs in your body. And if you're having muscle metabolism, it literally sends signals out of the rest of your body to be anti-cancer, anti-diabetic, etc. Fat metabolism sends signals out that's very pro-cancer, very pro-cancer stem cells, etc. So when we do that with people, now this freaks some people out because they've been like a couch potato their whole life, and now they have cancer and they feel horrible. And it's like, well, you want me to work out? It's easier to sell with people who were athletes before they got, that it's like, let's keep that muscle mass up, but for a person who their first event of movement or exercise is in their cancer care, we start with graded exercise tolerance, like you do with chronic fatigue patients or anybody else. And we just said, no, we don't want you to become, marathoner. But I just do this, and I say, look, fat metabolism, you die sooner. It's like, no one argues with that. Muscle metabolism, you die later. And all you need to do is incrementally increase it. So if you're literally just done with chemo and radiation, and your exercise for the day is going to the bathroom and back, we have you do the equivalent of one of those trips more, for a week, and then the next week too, and pretty soon you're walking around your house, then around the block. And it's literally the big muscles. So like your leg muscles, thankfully, because we usually get people to walk, your leg muscles will contribute more to this than any other part of you. Now, once they start to do it, they do other stuff. So muscle and food, huge. And obviously more muscle means less fat. And the last one is probably one of our biggest epigenetic stabilizers that people are either way into or they don't think of at all, kind of like diet. And that, I call that brain. And what I mean by brain is everything around your mind. So it's how you're thinking about your cancer, how people are talking to you about your cancer, kind of what you're taking in mentally and emotionally, but also how, like, cancer diagnosis is horrible, and people go through the stages of grief with it, and they can get stuck in different stages, and that's, they may not want to. And so we work a lot with mental emotional health workers who specialize in people with cancer and chronic illness, so that if someone's motivated and they get stuck, they can move on through. Because I can tell you again, from just looking back over time, if people don't handle the mental emotional part of the diagnosis, which you have to work on, they die faster. It's just like people who won't move or who won't change their diet or whatever. We can spend $1 billion treating you. I promise you'll die faster.
Mm-hmm.
So we usually talk to people about those things. And what's a bummer for most patients is what and how they eat, what and how they move, and how they think and process. That's all on me as the patient. I can help the patient with that, and we do. But getting them to see, if we don't do these things, yes, you can pay a lot of money for other treatments. They're going to you'll get better and you're just going to crash. So I think that focus has really helped. And that literally came from me looking backwards over the cancer research and then just my general career and saying, anything in common with people who did better and worse? And those things came up, and it was this realization that, wow, and they're all totally in my, wheelhouse as a patient, which can be depressing to some people, but it should be empowering because you can take care of all that stuff and we can help you. So,
it's just the way he lays it out. It's amazing. I mean, you're talking about this massive killer that affects so many individuals worldwide, right? Cancer is one of the big ones.
mm-hmm.
And almost everything you just spoke to was how we talk about just being healthy and just preventing just most disease as a whole. And we're just streaming from this epigenetic place of, hey, look, like, do the basic things that you just need to be doing with the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Like focus on eating real food, which I think that's a no-brainer for almost anybody. So that toxic picture, like you speak to, and I'm so glad that you talk about that. And then, like you're saying, like, quit stuffing your face all day. Like we're not we're not built to grow nonstop, and we've become this population of more, and it's in everything. It's in excess. And one of the things I'm always constantly telling my patients is, like, you were designed to go back and forth from these feast and famine modes, and if you skip one of them, you're going to throw the system off, right? Your metabolism. And so I just love the way that you laid that out, and I'm so glad that you said, this is just from my experience of seeing the ones that did better through this process and the ones that didn't. And you have all these years and experience under your belt to where you're telling, like, look, people, if this happens to you, be smart about it. And you have to put in the work, like you're saying, like we talk about the 80-20, right, Nick?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've got to do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that you brought up the mindset piece. That's something we talk a lot about on this podcast. Is just how important it is that we're dealing with constant trauma on a daily basis. It's kind of like we're stuffing our faces with food. We're also stuffing our minds with, chronic, negative thoughts or self-limiting beliefs or whatever, and that's poison for a body. And the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton talks, ad nauseum about just the power of words, power of thoughts and emotions and whatnot. So, I'm curious because I know you teach a ton on IV therapy, and people are always interested. What's the latest and greatest therapy? I want everyone to really sink into the fact that everything that Dr. Paul just spoke to it's on you, and you got to take ownership of that. Mm-hmm. And where do you go from there? What's next on the list? I know, we can dive into IV therapy or what have you, but what are some of the other therapies? And again, it's probably going to be cancer specific, but what are some of the other therapies you use on your patients?
Yeah, it's, because especially like our clinic is, we do a lot of interventional things because that's what I do. And we've evolved to doing hyperbaric oxygen and hyperthermia and IVs and stuff. And one of the reasons that other than it works, but one of the reasons we're really big on trying to educate patients about these foundations that they do is human nature for some people just pushes them towards, oh, I'm going to go to this clinic and get these things done to me. Which, yeah, I mean, if you're, most people are not going to give themselves an IV or hyperbaric or whatever. So it is done, with you and to you. But it disengages you sometimes from the personal responsibility part, and I mean, it's kind of like, I saw my chiropractor this morning, and I have, all these stretches that I do to try and stay, not as messed up as I am. And it's like, if I'm not doing my part, it helps to get adjusted or whatever, but I know I could do better, right? Especially getting off an airplane. So it's kind of the same. So with those, I literally have this, I keep drawing it with my fingers, but it's like three foundational blocks. And then the top part of the house, I call it all the other cool therapies. And these, you got to spend money for these and all this, so why not do the basics? So IV therapy, it's something I feel blessed that I was doing before it was legal for me to do. The statute of limitations would run out on that. So it's like back in the in the olden days, it was kind of you had to really do a lot of that. Thankfully, we don't have to do that anymore. But I think because I came from the other side of medicine where that was sort of a common modality, it was just sort of like, this is really cool to put nutrients into people instead of just drugs. In IV therapy, the workhorse in integrative oncology has kind of always been high dose vitamin C or vitamin C IVs. Almost every patient who comes in knows about, like they've read about it or heard about it because it's gone on for a long time. So we've always done that. I think one of the things that both just practice and then some of the research that we did with IVs and in this NIH-funded research project, it just took us to a new level of understanding about why vitamin C works the way it does, but also kind of to finesse the therapies a bit more. And I think of what we did 20 years ago and what we know and can do now. It's a testament to human sturdiness that people didn't have more side effects with the stuff we used to do. And there's now data and there's a lot of experience to show some people do better with higher and some people lower vitamin C doses. So one of the things is there, that's not a new treatment, but making it a little more patient specific is a better idea than just slamming everybody into one protocol, let's say. Now, for the most part, the higher doses, if people tolerate them, not only help with what we call oxidation, which is good for viruses or cancer cells or whatever, as far as it's really irritates the immune system aimed at that. But the other thing is the normal healthy cells generally use vitamin C in a very different way than the cancer cells will. Some cancer cells about the same, some it's very different. And so when I tell people I'm more concerned about treating your healthy cells, the cancer cells almost will take care of themselves. It's really true. Vitamin C is just cool in that it actually has different work it does with normal versus unhealthy cells. So we still use vitamin C a lot in either lower or higher dose strategies, either for recovery from stuff or during certain standard therapies to enhance them. There's a lot more research now showing, they used to think vitamin C IVs would cancel out, chemo or whatever, which is odd because if you look at how chemo works, vitamin C is not going to do that. All the research basically says, yes, it's only a synergist. So we actually do it now along with standard therapies and people live better through them. So that's kind of, I guess, the way we use vitamin C IV is very different than we used to. And I think the finesse part is very helpful. There are other things that along the way, not having success drives more innovation than being successful all the time. And it was interesting. I was talking to a integrative oncology practitioner who'd been to a bunch of classes over the years. I guess they just were kind of having, they're trying to put stuff together in their head. And they said, you're probably the only person I've ever heard teach who actually talked about cases that don't work, and that this stuff doesn't work for everybody. And I said, yeah, that's part of accepting that is that. But the other part of that is it drives you to try new things, because if you're always winning, you never try anything. Why would I try something new? So there's other things that we came upon, especially in the research project, because we had access to things that some we don't have access to anymore, and some we kind of do, or in Canada or Mexico we do. And so things like high-dose intravenous curcumin, interesting idea. It had been done like once in humans before, and then there were some German oncologists using it a little bit, and we got access to a couple of different forms of it. The form in high dose makes it's like totally different, because curcumin is not like vitamin C where it's water soluble and can go in my vein and just be okay. It has to be stabilized to get in. But the thing that we saw with high dose curcumin, while we could get it in this particular form, was we had people that had failed everything, including chemo and radiation, and they had bad metastases throughout their bones. We actually had cases, there's about 15 cases we got to do it, where their bone metastases regressed, which you don't see. I mean, it's like even with chemo, sometimes like you'll see it, but not much. And this is on, imaging, where the radiologist would say, oh, the chemo's work. They didn't know what we were doing. So that was very impressive. Now, in America, we can't get that kind of curcumin anymore. In Canada, you can. And so it's, I wrote a paper, a how-to paper on it. The kind we can get in America, sadly, we tried that on the same patients and their cancer came back just because its stability was different. But that's a kind of thing, like innovatively, that was really good to see that there was something that could be done. Now, completely not related, there's a chemotherapy drug that is basically curcumin for IV use that's getting through phase 3 trials and will be out for the public soon. Now, it's not used quite in the same way, but it was that good. So there you go. And I wish I owned that patent, but I don't. I've always worked with public domain substances, and so you don't get any money for any of that. So there's that. The other thing was something I learned from German oncologists again. We in this trial that we did with humans, my part, as you mentioned, was the IV part, but we had a whole integrative oncology team. The diet, acupuncture, mental, emotional, herbs, the whole thing. Some people would opt for IVs, and so that's where I came in. And so we would often sit and say, with our bad stage 4 patients, so the only people I got were stage 4. Who's still alive, and are they doing anything different? Because people at that point were doing all sorts of stuff. I had a lady who should have been dead long, long ago, and she was going to Germany and getting this therapy. And she came home with a suitcase full of this extract from wormwood, the plant wormwood called artesunate, which is the IV form. Artemisinin is usually the pill form, which is now much more known in the oncology world. But back then it was not known very well. But what they were doing in Germany, and I got literally a handwritten recipe on how to do this from this oncologist. It was, but hey, all right. We did it on me first, and I didn't die, and so then we tried it. She had been doing it over there, and this oncologist was all excited. So he sent a suitcase full of the drug over. I don't know who paid for it, but she brought in this giant suitcase, and now you'd be arrested. So we did what they were doing in Germany was the artesunate first, a quick infusion, very well tolerated. It's one of the most used drugs in the whole world for malaria. So it's got more safety data than almost any other drug. So that part we felt good with. And then we do the vitamin C afterwards. It turns out there was synergy. Well, we actually followed a group, and she had breast cancer, so that we had this bright idea that we'll try it, and we had a lot of breast cancer patients. We followed a group of 40 patients that we were seeing, so they're all getting integrative care. No change there. 30 did integrative care without IV, and 10, so it was a 3-to-1 ratio, 10 roughly did this addition of the artesunate vitamin C. And over the 3 years that we tracked them, what we saw was that they're, in the people doing IV plus their integrative care, their survival rate stayed much higher. And, each year with metastatic breast cancer, you get a lower survival rate. And it was not only statistically significant, but it was, the power was pretty impressive. And we kind of saw that with vitamin C, but there was obviously a bigger effect there. And the two things I think with those therapies are, whether it's the wormwood family of plant, like the artemisinin, artesunate, or the curcuminoids, the way that they do what they do is through modulating the immune system. And a lot of people will think, oh, we need to have our immune system really aggressive for cancer or whatever. The biggest problem in cancer is not so much being aggressive, it's going back to neutral balance, because our body is homeostatic and likes balance. Metastases are promoted when there's imbalance. And turns out curcuminoids, and in a totally different way, the wormwood family of plants, try to bring you back to balance more than they're stimulating. There's a little stimulation of some stuff, but really the end product is balance. So we felt that's probably why that worked. That therapy is again available in Canada and Mexico. IV artesunate is, as soon as I started to talk about it, it's not available in the US anymore. I have a suitable for framing cease and desist from the FDA for importing it at one point. So the FDA and I go way back. We're
you guys are close.
Yeah, I'm so far out of the closet now. It's like all that back alley illegal stuff I can't do anything anymore. But I can advise people in other countries, and I do that a lot. So those are super useful. The good thing is we can still get wormwood and its different extracts for oral use, and they're making them better absorbable now. And there's actually research going on now where they're doing them orally. It's not as magnificent an effect as IV can do, but especially in GI cancers, artemisinin orally works very well. So we do a lot of it still. So things like that came out, and there was other stuff too that we did. A lot of things actually, which we don't want to go down. It's a bit technical and rabbit traily. So I'll just say we go back to those 3 cancer cause things. Once we took and supported metabolic therapies through diet plus other metabolic helpers. So there's an IV protocol and an oral protocol that can help there. Hyperbaric oxygen can help, etc. We started to see big increases in survival in people who were not surviving. So that was very remarkable too. That big protocol I got to publish and write up, and it freaks people out because it involves so many different moving parts. But like if you're dying, you're usually willing to try to get the cancer under control. But really it all goes back to supporting metabolism. It's just if your cancer's out of control, you have to support it way more than say someone who's doing just prevention for health. Yeah. Right. So there's a lot of cool things so like in the book, Mark and I we have about 1,100 peer-reviewed references to reference everything in the book, which, by the way, our publisher, Hay House, did not know we were going to do. It's referenced like a textbook, but it's written for the layperson. And we did that so that when they go to their doctor and they say there's no science behind this, it's like, well, except for these 1,100 references. So Mark and I would have these contests, and I thought I won with the IV chapter because I was like 280 references or something. And so I sent him an email gloating, and he says, yeah, I just finished the botanical medicine chapter, and it's 350 or whatever it was. Now, I don't know if it's a lot. So like the botanical story could go on and on. Like mushrooms became a huge I mean, we're always using them, but we got to know a lot more about mushrooms and tons of other things. Fermented wheat germ extract became kind of a star. Number of other things from the plant world, obviously. So tons and tons of stuff. Now the thing I think, and this goes to kind of my educational side, is how do we know now, like now that we don't just have one therapy, how do we know when to do it, or how do we know when to finesse the vitamin C in one way or the other, or use oral stuff at what dose? And that's something I think it's really good for patients. It's a huge learning curve for the doctors. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's part of your mission too, is to share this information with doctors. And, you know, before we get to the end of the show, we definitely want to leave some more information for doctors, because doctors do listen into the podcast. They want to know how to access your information, check out your workshops and things like that. But one of the things I think that you keep coming back to in your conversation, which is so helpful, is that we're not treating cancer. Like, I love how you keep bringing it back to that. You're bringing the body back into balance. Mm-hmm. And when it's a mindset shift to just get out of that space that we're not attacking an illness, we're not stopping an illness, we're just making your body more resilient, more adaptable. We're teaching your body how to come back into balance. And all those therapies you recommended, or not recommended, but spoke to, improving oxygenation, improving your metabolism, your use of fat versus just carbohydrates or sugar, you know, the mindset piece, getting rid of the garbage and the clutter there. It's just, you're just sort of leveling the playing field so the body can actually just do what it's supposed to do. You know, Dr. David and I talk about this all the time. You're removing the obstacles to healing. The innate healing potential is within, not without. And you keep bringing it back to that messaging, which is so unbelievably empowering for so many people. Mm-hmm. So thank you for everything you do for us as a profession, but I mean for the patients, and it's amazing. David, what do you got for us, buddy?
No, in addition to Doc, just the way you laid it out, I think is just awesome. You know, I think there's a lot of confusion in a lot of these things, and if people can just make sense of it, it's just more easy for them to adapt this integrated approach and understand that, like Nick's saying, like, we're not going after the cancer, we're going after the reason your body, it wasn't able to fight off the cancer to begin with, right? So I'm a huge fan already, man, and I'm just getting to learn about you. So I really did enjoy this, and I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Yeah, we hope to bring you back, because this is like not even, I can't even call this the tip of the iceberg for Dr. Paul Anderson.
I think we hit the tip of the tip today.
Yeah, this was really the high spots, but I appreciate you keeping me on track, though. It's there's so much to talk about, and that becomes the problem sometimes, trying to get it all into one. But I just want to circle back that one concept that has become really a big part of, as you've seen, kind of the way we try and language this with patients and families, is really coming back to empowering people that this is, a lot of it is in your wheelhouse, like you can do it, you know, and the more you do, the better. But the other thing is, when we wrote the book, that was our other goal, other than not being us versus them or whatever, and just having information. But for instance, we put a chapter in that has different cancers and common therapies, and we say in the beginning of the chapter, some people misinterpret it, but we're not saying this is what we do for every person with prostate cancer, every person with bone mets or whatever. But for you, the patient who gets inundated with the internet is wonderful and also overwhelming. If you look up your cancer, this is where we would start after all these years of doing this. And so it doesn't mean these are the only things we'd use. So we have like 2 tiers, but if we were going to spend our own money and time on things beyond these basic things we talked about, we would start here, because we just have a track record that says these are more, the batting average is higher. These are going to hit more. And then we got fallback things. And so you, the patient, then if you're out researching and you hear about, something which may be totally legit, but no one's ever researched it or heard of it or anything, we try and steer you towards, putting your resources into things that are more likely to, be useful. And I think that was a big part of educating the patient that we really did try to, put in there. And that was Mark's really drove that, because I get all egg-headed about it. And, and he would email me and say, Paul, remember, we're writing to real people. And,
right.
this is really wonderful, but you went way in the wrong direction. So it's about patience and letting them know there's so much more that they can do. So
We'll tell you what, we at the end of every podcast, we always leave patients with some home play. And that's basically just an exercise for them to start to, encourage them to start to look into these different areas or utilize some of them. And I'm just going to say it. I think the best thing that you can do is, we all know someone. The cancer rates are 1 in 2 now.
Yeah, almost 1 in 2. Yeah, 1 in 3 to 1 in 2.
Yeah. So this is a handbook. This is a resource guide for you to take, to your loved ones, to anyone you know, but also to your doctor, and say, these are things that I'm interested in applying, because the more you can strengthen your team in this experience, the better you're going to do. And so those resources are essential, and it's a life manual really to become more adaptable, to bring your body back to homeostasis. We all need this. We all need to share this with others. So I'm going to encourage that your home play is go on Amazon, go wherever you need to do, and check out the book, Outside the Box Cancer Therapies by Dr. Paul Anderson and Dr. Stengler, right?
Mm-hmm. Mark
Stengler, and check it out. So Dr. Paul, again, such a pleasure having you on here. You're a hero of mine. You're now a hero of Dr. David here, and everyone who's listening. And check where can we send them to? Yes, maybe you can tell us where we can send people to learn about your courses that you're teaching and doctors on, potential patients to the clinic in the Seattle area and beyond. Where can they find you?
Yeah, on the patient side, if you go to cancerandchronicdisease.com, that gets to our website at Advanced Medical Therapies. We actually have a lot of resources there, and a lot of stuff you can look at. That's on the patient side. On the doctor practitioner side, consultdranderson.com is a CE website. It also has a big hundreds and hundreds of things I've written over the years, searchable, that are free and everything. There's some CE you can pay for too, but there's a lot of free stuff on there. For doctors, that's the kind of the portal into a lot of my online content. And then also there's a schedule on there of, where am I doing talks, etc. I do a conference that I run twice a year. We're doing oncology in the fall, but we have a different topic twice a year called Advanced Applications in Medical Practice. And the info's there for that too. So the oncology one it's kind of for the physician practitioner. It's all this stuff we talked about and how to kind of make sense of it and actually do it without getting too confused. So there's that. And if you don't like to type Anderson, it also has a URL of just consultdra.com for people who don't want to type long words. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we'll put in the show notes all that information.
Great. Thank you.
David, do you want to take us out?
Yeah. Well, there you have it, everyone. Another amazing practitioner here shedding his knowledge with us all. And get on that home plate. Check out his book. Again, Doc, thank you. Much appreciated. Much love. And yes, we're going to have you on again to hit another one of these topics for sure, because there's plenty more to dive in. And in the theme of all these fun things for disease prevention, there's another one this week, and we'll see you guys again next week.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the Dr. Dads and share with your family and friends. You can also follow and interact with Dr. Nick and Dr. David on Facebook and Instagram for a daily dose of inspiration and the latest in health and wellness. Be well.